My parents kicked me out at 16, but threw my sister a $30,000 Sweet 16 party, so I became successful and never gave them a penny. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and when I was a kid, I thought my parents loved us both equally. Back then, I didn't understand the quiet hierarchies that existed in our house, the invisible scales that always tipped in favor of my younger sister, Lily. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect middle-class family, a nice suburban home, matching Christmas sweaters, and 2 smiling kids in every holiday photo. But behind the smiles was a different kind of system, one built entirely around appearances. My parents were obsessed with how things looked. My dad, a manager at a local bank, wanted everyone to think we were respectable, well-bred people. My mom cared about social circles, dinner parties, and what the neighbors might say. I was the quiet one, did my homework, helped around the house, kept to myself. Lily, on the other hand, could do no wrong. She was loud, dramatic, and always in the center of attention, the kind of kid who could break a vase and somehow get praised for being spirited. I still remember the day I brought home a science award from school. I was so proud my teacher had even written a personal note on the certificate. My mom barely looked up from her phone and said, "That's nice, honey," while Lily came running in, bragging about how she'd been picked to sing at the school assembly. My dad lit up instantly, saying, "That's my girl," and the conversation shifted entirely to her. My achievement vanished before it even existed. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. I didn't know it yet, but that subtle favoritism, the kind I tried so hard to ignore, was only the beginning. As Lily's 16th birthday drew closer, the cracks in our perfect family would start to widen into something impossible to hide. Things really started shifting when I turned 16. My parents began treating me less like a son and more like a problem they couldn't wait to get rid of. I worked part-time at a grocery store after school, mostly to save for college. Every dollar mattered, but in my parents' eyes, my job was a distraction. My dad would say things like, "You're always chasing something," while Lily got a brand new phone for being responsible. Our house became a stage for tension. Every conversation turned into a lecture. How I dressed, who I spent time with, what kind of future I thought I had. My mom once told me, "You don't understand how hard we work to keep this family's image clean." I remember staring at her, confused. "What image?" I asked. "We're not celebrities." She just frowned and said, "You'll understand when you're older." One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. My dad's voice was low but sharp. He's getting harder to manage. Maybe it's time to let him figure things out on his own. My mom didn't argue. She just sighed and said, "We can't keep dealing with his attitude." I froze in the hallway, realizing they weren't talking about grounding me or setting rules. They were talking about getting rid of me. A few days later, everything exploded. My dad accused me of disrespect because I refused to hand over my paycheck for the house. I told him I was saving for college, that I wanted to be independent. His face turned red. "You think you're better than us?" he shouted. My mom stepped in, yelling about my ungrateful behavior. It all blurred together, words, shouting, anger. Then came the sentence I'll never forget. My dad pointed to the door and said, "If you want to live by your own rules, then do it somewhere else." And just like that, I was kicked out 16 years old, standing on the porch with a duffel bag and no plan. The night air felt colder than I'd ever remembered. I stood there with a single duffel bag, watching the light from our living room fade as my dad closed the door behind me. For the first few minutes, I just stood still, too stunned to cry, too angry to think. I'd always imagined that if I ever left home, it would be because I was going off to college or chasing a dream, not because my own parents had thrown me out like I didn't matter. I ended up walking aimlessly for hours, gripping my bag so tight my hands went numb. I called a few friends, but only one picked up Tyler. His voice cracked with shock when I told him what happened. "Dude, come over. My mom won't care for a few days." That night, I slept on his couch under a thin blanket, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. The days that followed blurred together. I tried to go to school like nothing happened, but the exhaustion caught up quickly. I'd skip lunch to save money, using my grocery store shifts to scrape together enough for cheap food. The worst part wasn't hunger, it was the silence. My phone stayed dead quiet. No calls, no texts, no apologies. It was like I'd never existed to them. One evening, my history teacher, Mrs. Grant, noticed how pale I looked and asked if I was okay. I shrugged it off, but she didn't buy it. The next day, she handed me a brown paper bag at the end of class, sandwiches, fruit, and a note that just said, "You deserve better." I don't think I've ever felt so seen in my life. That night, sitting on that same couch, I made a silent promise to myself. I didn't know how yet, but one day, I'd build a life they couldn't ignore. Not for revenge, but to prove that I was worth something, even if they couldn't see it. A few months after I'd been kicked out, I thought I'd finally started moving on. I had a rhythm school: work, sleep, repeat. I didn't talk about my family anymore, and I convinced myself I didn't care. That illusion shattered the day I saw Lily's Sweet 16 party plastered all over social media. I was scrolling on a friend's phone during lunch when her face filled the screen. Lily in a sparkling designer dress, surrounded by balloons and flashing lights. The caption read, $30,000, Sweet 16. So proud of our beautiful girl. My heart stopped. $30,000. For her party. For the same family that claimed they couldn't afford to help me with college. The same parents who said I was a burden. The photos were like a punch to the gut. A red carpet entrance. A 3-tier cake with her name written in gold. My dad in a tuxedo, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. My mom holding Lily's hand as she blew out candles while guests clapped. For a second, I felt like a ghost watching a family that used to be mine. Tyler leaned over and muttered, "Man, that's messed up." I just nodded, unable to speak. I wanted to be angry, and I was, but beneath the anger was something heavier. Grief. Grief for the idea of family I'd once believed in. That night, I walked alone downtown, the neon signs reflecting off puddles on the pavement. Every laugh, every car horn, every light felt distant. My parents had replaced me with a perfect memory, the obedient daughter, the showpiece they could parade around to prove how successful they were as parents. Somewhere between that ache and the cold wind, something inside me hardened. If they wanted me gone, fine. But I'd make damn sure that one day, when they heard my name again, it wouldn't be as their son, it'd be as the man they should have never underestimated. After that night, something in me changed. The pain was still there, sharp, raw, and constant, but I stopped letting it control me. Instead, I used it. I doubled down on school, took extra shifts at the store, and stopped waiting for anyone to rescue me. I was 16, broke, and alone, but for the first time, I was free from their expectations. I remember the first time I held my own paycheck and realized no one could take it from me. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover food and bus fare, but it was mine. Every dollar meant survival. I'd spend my nights studying at the public library until closing, surrounded by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper. Sometimes I'd fall asleep over my books, only to wake up when the janitor tapped my shoulder and said softly, "Time to go, kid." College felt like a faraway dream, but I refused to let it die. I applied for every scholarship I could find, essays, contests, anything. Most ended in rejection, but one finally hit. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to enroll in community college part-time. When I got the acceptance email, I cried right there in the library bathroom, not because I was proud, but because, for once, I'd done something no one could take credit for. My life became a grind. Work, study, sleep, repeat. Some days I'd eat instant noodles 3 times a day, pretending the taste didn't bother me. Other days, I'd skip meals just to afford textbooks. But every struggle reminded me of why I was doing this. Because they gave up on me, and I refused to give up on myself. I didn't know it yet, but those long nights, the hunger, the exhaustion, the loneliness, were forging something inside me. A kind of strength that no parent, no betrayal, could ever take away. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd heard from my parents when their number suddenly popped up on my phone. For a second, I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But curiosity, or maybe old habit, made me answer. "Hey, honey," my mom said, in that same cheerful, rehearsed voice she used with neighbors. "It's been so long, we were just thinking about you." Her tone didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like small talk. I forced a neutral tone. "Yeah, I've been busy." In the background, I could hear laughter, Lily's voice, bright and carefree. Then my dad took the phone. "Your sister's doing great, by the way," he said. "She just got accepted into that private academy. were so proud of her. I bit down on my lip, staring at the cracked wallpaper of my apartment. That call wasn't to check on me. It was a victory lap. They wanted to remind me that Lily was thriving while I was still clawing my way through life. My mom added, almost casually, "You should come by sometime. It's been awkward with people asking where you've been." That line hit me harder than I expected. They didn't miss me. They missed the illusion of family, the perfect picture I'd ruined by existing outside their frame. I ended the call politely, saying I had work to do, but when I hung up, my hands were shaking. For days, I couldn't focus. I felt like that 16-year-old kid again, thrown out for being inconvenient. Then something inside me hardened again that night. I opened my old laptop and typed "how to start a business" into the search bar. I didn't have much, a few $100s in savings and a cheap Wi-Fi plan, but I had drive. I'd build something of my own, something real. They wanted to measure my worth by comparison. I was going to make sure there was no comparison left to make. Those first months of trying to build something from nothing were brutal. I didn't know what I was doing, just that I refused to stay stuck. I started freelancing online, designing logos and doing small graphic jobs for local businesses. My old laptop would overheat every hour, and the screen had a crack down the middle. But I worked through it. Every little gig felt like a step forward, even if the pay barely covered groceries. I lived cheap. My apartment was basically a shoebox, peeling wallpaper, a flickering bulb, and a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. No one could walk in yelling about attitude or image. Every time I made rent on my own, it felt like reclaiming a small piece of power. There were nights when I wanted to give up. Clients ghosted me, payments were delayed, and self-doubt hit like a storm. I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain, wondering if maybe my parents were right, maybe I wasn't enough. But then I'd remember that night on the porch, the sound of the door slamming behind me, and the humiliation burned into motivation. Slowly, things started to change. My work got better. People started recommending me to their friends. Within a year, I was making enough to quit my grocery job and focus full-time. I saved, invested in better equipment, and taught myself everything I could: marketing, web design, management. I still didn't talk to my family. I thought about them sometimes, usually late at night when the apartment was too quiet. A part of me wondered if they ever regretted what they did, but I couldn't let myself linger there. I wasn't building my life for their approval anymore. Every success, every client, every milestone was a reminder that I didn't need their permission to exist. A few years into my grind, I started noticing things about my family from the outside world. Social media was the window I couldn't resist peeking through. My parents' accounts were full of carefully curated photos, Lily smiling in her expensive dresses, fancy dinners, vacation shots, the perfect little image they'd built. But behind the smiles, the cracks were starting to show. The house they flaunted, mortgaged, barely keeping up with payments. My dad's promotion at the bank, a story they told more than it was real. And Lily, the girl they'd built into this flawless star, struggling to keep up with the lifestyle they demanded. Every post felt like a highlight reel designed to hide the chaos underneath. I remember scrolling through a group chat with some old neighbors. They were talking quietly about my parents' financial stress, about the bills piling up, about Lily's spoiled habits catching up to her. A strange mix of vindication and disbelief settled over me. I wasn't gloating, but I couldn't ignore the irony. The same people who kicked me out were now barely keeping the life they used to flaunt. And yet, I felt no rush to step in. No calls, no offers of help. They had chosen their path, and the consequences were theirs to face. It was strange, that mix of satisfaction and relief. The tension that had built inside me over the years didn't need release through confrontation. It needed proof. Proof that I'd built a life from nothing. But then came a twist I hadn't expected. Through a mutual friend, I learned that my parents were quietly asking about me. Not because they missed me, but because they needed someone to bail them out. Hearing that, I realized just how different we were now. They had created a world dependent on appearances, and I had created a world independent of them. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange calm. Their image might still look perfect to strangers, but I knew the truth, and it was mine to hold. It hit me like a cold splash of water. Years later, after building a life I could be proud of, I got the call I never thought I would, my mom's voice trembling on the other end. We're in trouble," she said. Your father's business is failing, and we don't know what to do. Lily, she's struggling too. Please, we need help." For a second, I didn't speak. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of my old ceiling fan. Part of me wanted to hang up, to never hear their voices again. But another part of me, buried deep under years of resentment and scars, felt that familiar twinge of obligation, the one I had fought so hard to bury. "Mom, I don't know what you expect me to say," I finally replied, keeping my voice steady, after everything. I know," she sobbed, "but we don't have anyone else. Please." I remembered 16-year-old me, standing on that porch with a duffel bag, abandoned and alone, while Lily was inside having everything handed to her. I remembered every night I cried myself to sleep, every dollar I worked for, every humiliation I swallowed silently. And in that memory, I found clarity. "I can't," I said softly, almost whispering. "You made your choices. You threw me out. You chose her over me. Now you live with that." There was silence on the other end. I imagined my parents' faces, shock, shame, maybe even panic, but it didn't matter. I had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head. I wasn't doing it to hurt them. I was doing it to finally close the door. I hung up, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that I could finally draw the line. Sorrow for the family that had been a home in name only. For the first time in years, I felt entirely in control of my own life. And somewhere in that calm, I realized the boy they kicked out at 16 had just become the man they could never break. After that call, I started hearing the full story from people who had stayed close to my old neighborhood. Lily's $30,000. Sweet 16. Every cent had been charged to credit cards my parents couldn't afford to pay. The lavish party, the designer dress, the perfect photos, it had all been a debt trap, a glittering facade, hiding financial instability. Suddenly, the world they'd built to impress everyone was collapsing from within. I remember laughing quietly to myself the first time I heard it. Not maliciously, not out of glee, but out of ironic relief. The same people who had thrown me out, claiming I was a burden, were now struggling under the weight of their own choices. Lily, the girl they had spoiled so thoroughly, was learning lessons I had been forced to learn the hard way. She called friends crying about unpaid bills and the looming threat of repossession, while my parents scrambled to maintain appearances. Then came the call from Lily herself. Her voice, once bubbly and carefree, now trembled. I don't know why you won't help me. You have money. You always had everything I wanted," she yelled, and I felt the old ache of being replaced surge through me. But this time, it was different. I didn't feel desperation or rage. I felt clarity. "You had everything I didn't," I said calmly, my voice steady. "And what did you do with it? You made choices, and now you face the consequences. I won't be the person who cleans up after your mistakes." There was silence on the line. I imagined her staring at the phone, realizing that I had finally set boundaries she couldn't ignore. I didn't hang up immediately. I wanted her to feel the weight of those words, the same weight I had carried for years. When I finally did, I sat back in my chair, letting the quiet wash over me. The city outside hummed in its usual rhythm, indifferent to family drama, indifferent to betrayal. And for the first time, I felt untethered from the past. I had survived, I had succeeded, and I owed them nothing. Years passed, and the distance between me and my family became more than physical. It was emotional, almost like a shield I built to protect myself. I had grown my freelance work into a small company, and I was finally earning comfortably. My apartment was no longer a cramped shoebox. It was a space I could call home, filled with books, photos, and memories of every step I'd taken to get here. I had proof that I could survive, thrive, and succeed, all without their help. Sometimes I reflected on the irony. They had thought that kicking me out at 16 would ruin me, that I'd crumble under pressure, that I'd return begging for scraps. Instead, it had forced me to grow faster, to fight harder, to see the world as something I could shape with my own hands. I realized that the real victory wasn't money, or prestige, or even independence. It was owning my life entirely. A part of me began giving back quietly. I donated anonymously to youth programs, mentorship initiatives, and scholarships for kids who, like me, had been abandoned or overlooked. I remembered those nights at 16, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would care. I wanted to be the invisible hand that helped someone climb out of that darkness. I never sought recognition for it, but knowing that I could change someone's life, even in a small way, gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My resentment toward my parents faded into indifference, not because I forgave them, but because I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. One evening, I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and pink. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete, a comforting reminder of the life I had fought to build. I smiled, thinking about that boy they kicked out, the one who had once felt invisible. He was gone. In his place stood a man they could never break, someone stronger, wiser, and finally, free. It was years later when I ran into Lily, not at a party, not at a family event, but at a small community volunteer program I'd started. She looked older, worn down in a way that made my chest tighten for a moment. Gone was the sparkling, untouchable girl from her Sweet 16 photos. She wore a plain jacket, her hair tied back, and there was a weight in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She spotted me across the room and froze. It's you," she said softly, almost afraid to speak. I nodded. "It's me," I replied. Neither of us moved at first. For years, our paths had diverged completely. She had lived the life I'd been denied, only to watch it unravel under the weight of her parents' choices. "I messed up," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of volunteers sorting donations. "Mom and Dad, everything's gone." I never understood. I studied her face. There was no anger in me, only the calm that comes from surviving and finally letting go. "We all got what we were taught," I said gently. The truth of it hit both of us in that quiet moment. I didn't say more. There was nothing else to say. She hesitated, like she wanted to ask if I'd ever hated them, hated her, hated the life I'd been forced to fight for alone. I shook my head. "For a while," I admitted, "but now, I just don't think about them." We shared a small, awkward smile, a moment suspended between the past and the present. She turned and walked away, leaving me to watch her fade into the bustling room of volunteers. And as I stood there, a soft breeze from the open windows brushing my face, I realized something profound. I had finally closed that chapter. The boy who was kicked out at 16, humiliated and abandoned, had become a man who didn't need validation, revenge, or approval. I had survived. I had succeeded. And in that ultimate closure, I felt a peace so deep it almost stunned me. The kind of peace that only comes when you finally won the hardest battle of all, reclaiming your life.